everybody. Happy Monday night to everybody. There we go, it's probably better. Good evening. How's everybody doing? It's funny, Italian Stallion, if I had $1 for every time somebody said Chip for president, I wouldn't last 20 minutes. Hey, Shakedown. Do you think they'd let somebody like me run? I mean, are you serious? Hi. Yeah, I've been on two different lives today, maybe 3. I don't know if you guys see, but when I get on, the one I was on one that was a little bit, it was a kind of a debate format, and there was, one thing I've noticed, and again, I don't want to say this, but, I think it's better to be polite, wait your turn, be quiet, don't interrupt people, all that stuff. And I've kind of made my style on that. Hey, but for whatever reason, people don't do that. It's like, especially the pro-Israeli ones, they just tend to be very mean, rude, arrogant, name-calling, just nonsense, right? I mean, it's fair to make an argument. And if you really disagree with somebody, you can say, hey, I disagree with that. I think that's silly. But you don't have to call somebody a name. Somebody called me a complete effing moron or something like that today. Anyway, I mean, in fairness, we could say the same thing, right? If somebody hasn't been through some of these resources. So, anyway, you make the points you can when you can and try to get them to behave like decent people. But I don't think a lot of these people are decent. And I think that they're, rooting for their team, which I understand. But they kind of have to go somewhere. Like every time, it was funny, every time an issue would be brought up with respect to what the Israeli military is doing, they would say, well, what about the pogroms that happened back in 17? No. We can talk about that. I know that there's been historical persecution. Okay, fair enough. But what does that have to do with the thing we're talking about right now that's happening in real time? What about that? Let's talk about that. No, we got to talk about can you believe what it must be like to go through the Holocaust? Yeah, it's got to suck. Let's get back to this point. Can you believe that's got to suck. Let's get back to this point. They just will not go, and they can't. That's the point, is that when your country or your military is doing things that are, basically indefensible, there's no defense. So you have to shift, you have to deflect, or you have to name call or smear somebody. I get this all the time. You just HATE all the JEWS. You just hate people. No, I don't. And the reason I prove that to them is to say that if the situation was flipped 180 degrees, and let's just say in 1948, for whatever reason, there was an Arab state that got carved out of some or part of historic Palestine. Very unequally, by the way. Let's say that the Jewish population was 65% and the Arab population was 35%, but they gave the Arab population 55% of the land or whatever. So it was unfair, and all the Jewish people had to move, or many of them. Some got put into this society, but many had to go. Like 700,000 Jews got expelled from their land. That'd be, people screaming bloody murder from the hilltop. And then subsequent to that, the Arab state did all these horrible things to manage and discriminate against and harm, and the whole story about what's done in the occupied West Bank, and of course, the blockade in Gaza. And it's just never been good for Palestinian people. Now, it's not a one-sided thing altogether. There's been some resistance movements and some pretty harsh things that have been done. So if you look at, let's just say, the Jewish people in this situation, they had a more of a hardline group that was willing to fight back, and they looked at it as like a prideful thing, like it's to be celebrated if you end up giving your life for the cause, so be it. You're like someone who's a martyr, or whatever you want to call it. So basically, the dynamics are the same. Persecution, exploitation, unaliving, stealing of land. If that was all happening to Jewish people by an Arab state, even if the Jewish people chose to fight back using horrible tactics, I would support the Jewish resistance against the Arab state because of what the Arab state was doing to the Jewish people. So it's not about who's doing it per se, it's about the power dynamic of someone who's exploiting and someone who's becoming exploited. And that's why I advocate for the Palestinian people. I don't know anybody in Palestine. I'm sure people are perfectly nice. I don't know anybody in Israel. I'm sure some people there are nice. A lot of the people that I've encountered through these lives are not very nice. They come across as very mean, very angry, very rude, condescending, arrogant. I don't like those qualities. I don't think anybody likes those qualities. And if that's what you bring to the table, people have a right to say, hey, I don't think that's very pleasant. It's not the kind of thing that you want to be around. And I don't know how pervasive that is in the Zionist community. And the other thing you get a lot of times, which is complete bullshit, I'm so tired of it, they say you can't be anti-Zionism without being an anti-Semite. Come on, that's ridiculous, right? I mean, I could care less who's who, right? It doesn't matter. It just so happens in this case that the majority of the people are identify as Jewish people, and the movement happens to be a Zionist movement filled with people who happen to be Jewish, right? It's the political and the actual aspects of the behavior that creates the problem, not exactly the ethnicity or the religion of who's doing it, right? Like somebody said from the age group, he said, if my cousin came and took my home, and my cousin's Arabic, and is a Muslim, I would be resisting my brother, my cousin. That's the point. It's the perpetrator that you're going against, not the ethnicity or the religion of the perpetrator, right? But they always try to deflect it, and they always try to smear you, because that's a logical argument of what I just said, and it can't be refuted logically. So you have to go to an illogical space to push back, right? So yeah, the Talmud is another thing, as far as, all the different things it says about supremacy and how you have a right to do what you want to do to anybody who's not a believer in your faith and all that garbage. I'm not down with any religious interpretations that use supremacy as an argument. Let's face it, it's bullshit, right? So there is somebody in the guest queue. Let me just take a look. So it's Noble Camel Herder. That sounds like a silly... Anyway, so I usually go about 15, 20 minutes minimum talking about whatever, kind of monologuing. And then we get into guests. So if you don't mind holding on, I appreciate that. And by the way, if you're somebody who sees this issue differently than I do, which is fine, I just want to promise you I'll give you respect and I'll treat you equally. I'm not going to talk over you or try to, dominate you or whatever people do. And I'm certainly not going to try to crush you, because that doesn't make any sense. But I'm happy to have a dialogue. I just don't want to have somebody else I get the privilege of having a monologue at the beginning because I run the show. But if we're going to have an exchange, let's keep it to that level where, let's say you speak for a minute, maybe two, and then we have a chance to go back and forth a little bit. So, and listen, there are arguments to be made on the other side. I've had some great conversations with people, and I understand their argument, right? I understand their argument. But I disagree with it, right? But if I were in their shoes, I would understand how someone could feel the way they feel and direct their thoughts and energy in that direction. And that's not me being condescending to say, well, I know better. No, I have a different take. So the same physical acts have been happening for years, right? We know that there was what happened in 1948 when the State of Israel was formed. And we know what happened in 1967. And we know what's happened in 1973. And we know what's happened subsequent in the West Bank and all the stuff that's gone on, the different incursions into Gaza, protective edge, what are these different names they give it? And, that's what's happened, right? Those are the events that occurred. Now you can put a different story around that and say, well, we did it for defensive reasons. We have to keep these people in line or else they're going to breach our security, right? That's one interpretation. The other one is a bunch of tanks came in and blew away people and blew up a bunch of buildings, right? And our people died. It's another interpretation. So the thing I keep trying to share with those who support the Israeli narrative is you have to remember the original dynamics, because it all goes back to those original dynamics, right? So if you're the person who takes someone else's stuff or pushes them off of their land they've been living on for multiple generations for no fault of their own, other than there's been some edict, some artificial third-party edict who said it was so, which you lobbied for, and then it becomes so, and you're dispossessed of your land, well, no one would like that. I don't know anybody who would like that. Doesn't matter if you're Jewish, doesn't matter if you're an Arab, doesn't matter if you practice Islam, if you practice Judaism, if you practice Buddhism, doesn't matter. Hi, Sally. So that's the original problem. I call it the original sin. And then if you go from there, all the subsequent things that have happened, people say, well, the responses to that have been what's wrong. If these people shouldn't have a right to attack us because, they're just violent. That's all they want to do is violence. Well, no. I would imagine that most people, the first thing they don't want to resort to is look at any human relationship. You don't walk up to somebody and just wallop them. You try to talk it through first. The person's acting like a jerk. Hey, Mike. Then you say, okay, the person's not agreeable. We got to go to step 2, and maybe step 3 if you have to. You don't want to, is doing something violent, right? But it's not step 1. So people don't want to be violent. They don't have this bloodlust or something like that. That's the story that gets told to try to justify or cover up what's really going on. But they're responding to an injustice, just like anybody would. And therefore, it makes sense within that context. Why would somebody do something? Because of what you've done to them. Now, you can get back into these little petty things like tit for tat, but their argument is that the H group, by virtue of sending rockets into Israel, these crude, non-guided, third-rate, they're glorified bottle rockets that don't have a very big payload, and there's been many, many, many thousands of these fired over a long period of time, and a total of 6, count it, 6, not 60, not 600, 6 Israelis have died over the years. There's some damage to property, and people have been injured, but 6 fatalities, right? So compare that to the total number of fatalities just since 1967. Forget about what happened during the Nakba. Forget about all that. I mean, not that it's not worthy of remember. I'm just saying it for context. Because the rockets weren't even fired until after the group was formed, which is going back to the late 80s. So if you go from the late 80s to present, the numbers are completely askew. The number of Palestinians that have been harmed or unalived inside of Gaza, in East Jerusalem, and in the West Bank, I mean, it's like 20 or 30 to 1. It's not even close. But they'll still claim, because the person being oppressed resists, that they're being attacked and that the people are just violent. They don't know how to have peace. No, they've tried for decades to work through a peace process with the Israeli government, but they were never offered something that involves freedom and autonomy and dignity, right? I mean, what if somebody says, okay, I'll give you your car back, but you can only drive it on Tuesdays. I have to come inspect it before you drive. I have to follow you in my car when you do. You're like, dude, fuck this. That's bullshit. Those are the kind of deals that were offered to Palestinians. Like, why won't you take this deal? We're giving you your car back. Asshole, it's my car. I want to drive it when I want to. Get the hell out of my way, right? So again, to say somebody doesn't want peace because you give them a terribly, oppressive deal, it's not a good way to negotiate, right? It's negotiating in bad faith. The point of a good deal is, would you take the other side? If you take the other side, then it's a fair deal. If you wouldn't, well, then it's not a fair deal. And the Israelis have never once offered the Palestinians a fair deal, ever. So if you want some factual basis to back that up, and don't trust me, I'm just some guy, go read Norman Finkelstein's books. He painstakingly goes through detail by detail by detail of every single peace negotiation and lays it out for you in black and white. And there's never been a deal that anybody was acceptable to anybody. Even Israelis who have looked at these things have said the same thing. I wouldn't have taken those deals. Even former prime ministers have said that. So, there's a certain amount of projection and just disbelief. It's like almost like a sociopathic, so like can't acknowledge one's flaws. I mean, I guess Donald Trump has some of that, right? He never says sorry or never says I made a mistake. But whatever that personality type is, and I noticed it too. I don't know if I told you all this before. I've been to Hawaii one time when I was younger, and I went to this private beach, and there was an Israeli girl there. And she wasn't super attractive, but she wasn't unattractive. She was, she was a moderately attractive woman, but she acted like she was like a supermodel, like nobody could talk to her. Like she was like, be gone. That kind of attitude. Very dismissive, very arrogant, very rude. And I think that a lot of that pervades, from what I've felt from these interactions that I've had with people. And again, you can't make a full generalization, right? That's not fair. But I've seen enough instances of it that it's noticeable, right? So I don't know what it is about how these people are raised. Maybe they're told they're special, or maybe they think they're special, that they're God's chosen people, and therefore everyone else is sort of looked down upon. That may be a lot of it. But I can tell you that I don't find it very pleasant. I try to give people at least some modicum of respect and see where it goes, right? But in a lot of these lives, like I shared with you, somebody who's pro-Israel feels perfectly entitled to interrupt you at any time, loudly, not stop talking, say that, quote unquote, they have to stop you to correct you because you're lying to them. Rather than hearing you out and letting you finish the totality of what you wanted to say, so you may actually say something that they agree with, but they're cutting you off midway. It's very rude, it's very selfish, it's very arrogant. It's just not a pleasant type of human being to be around, right? So maybe it's just the way they are because of how they're kind of hardened into that society where they're told from birth all this stuff and they're told they're always the victim, and they're very defensive, right? They're not kind of quiet and open. They're sort of always tightened up and pushing back. How dare you? How dare you? You're a blood libel. You're an anti-Semite. You hate all the Jews. No, I'm talking about an issue related to, if it was anybody else, I'd talk about it the same way. It doesn't matter who the parties are. So anyway, I just want to share that with you all. Now, I did drop a video today. By the way, I don't want to go into this in too much detail, but I did drop a video about this issue. I'll cover it briefly. And that is, obviously, there's a lot going on TikTok. I don't know exactly how it works, who's pressuring what. I don't know what goes on. I call it shenanigans, but it's going on big time right now. And they're really, really putting the pedal down. So I know something's changed this week. I can tell you right now it's changed this week. Because I drop, 2-3 videos a day, maybe a couple days without, whatever. I dropped 3 in the last 8 hours. And the combined views on those 3 videos were 1,200. I normally get 1,200 views within 15 minutes on most of my videos. I had 3 that went out within an hour, and I had 1,200. So they're just not putting them into people's feeds. And I don't even know what's happening when people repost them. So, maybe the videos sucked. That's also possible, true. It could be that. But my guess is no, because even when my videos suck, they get a lot more views. They get at least 8,000 or something like that. So anyway, yeah, the victim thing is hard to swallow, right? Because they're right now the ones that are dishing out so much more damage, destruction, and unalivedness. And yet they somehow claim that, it's their fault. They're doing it on purpose to us because they're using them as human shields, right? You hear that? It's complete bullshit. So yeah, other content creators are talking about this too, about the fact that, on TikTok especially, and somewhat on Instagram. We saw that Sean King got taken off Instagram. But basically, anybody who's putting out a strong pro-Palestinian message or being critical of Israel or the IDF or whatever is getting hammered. Hammered. Somebody says, you are not the one complaining. I'm not sure. Listen, as I said before, I don't want to be a whiner. Whining doesn't get anything done, right? I'm simply pointing it out to you, the audience, so you can hear about it. We'll let it go. Let's hope it gets better, because it seems like it's going in the wrong direction, right? What I did was I took it down. Somebody says, I saw your video and then it disappeared. What I did was I put one up that was very, very, very critical of the IDF military. Scott Ritter was the back half of the video. If you don't know who Scott Ritter is, he's a former UN weapons inspector who's always been sort of counter-establishment in terms of pushing back against WMDs in Iraq. Sorry, that's my trading software. Let me see what that says here. Okay, that's the S&P falling. I trade, just so you know. So anyway, so Scott Ritter was saying something to the effect that he thought the Israeli ground forces were, let's put it this way, less than prepared for what they needed to do. He put it a lot more, sort of unpleasantly, and I let him go. But he did say some words that I had to bleep out, graping and red rumming, or whatever. You can't TikTok. You can't put those kind of words out there. People say it. The word, RAPE. You can't say that word. It automatically brings the video down. So, and I learned how to do that. By the way, I never learned how to edit videos and put in beeps. It's kind of cool. Now I know how to do it. So, anyway, so that video I put on there, and then it got 0 views for 15 minutes. And what I thought was the video was under review, which they don't tell you right away. But usually if you get no views for 15, 20 minutes, the videos. So what I did was I pulled it down, because you don't want to get a strike. And if you pull it down before they finish their review, you don't get a strike. But if they take it down as reviewing, you get a strike. And even if they put it back up with an appeal, the strike stays on you. If you get 5 or 6 strikes, your account's gone. So you really got to be careful with how you... It's a whole game I've learned to play, at least as best I can. Anyway, it kind of sucks, but it is what it is. All right, let's see if we had somebody still waiting in the guest queue. No, they dropped. That's fair. Sorry about the wait there, if you're in there. So... there's Lebanon. The thing with Lebanon is heating up. We should talk about that for a little bit, because that's the next big question with what's going to happen next. If Lebanon is drawn into the conflict, which I think Nasrallah is being very, very careful and very measured about this, who's the leader of Hezbollah. But remember that the Lebanese government said that if the Israelis attack anything inside of the deep part of Lebanon, that would be an act of aggression/war, and they would respond. So we'll see. Somebody says, can I put my questionable videos on my third account? Yeah, I could do that. I could load it up to my backup account, which is Truthseeker670. It's in my link tree. So for those of you who want to check out I have other videos, by the way, on my backup account that I don't have on my primary account, including some stuff with my dog, which is kind of fun. My dog Ruby, who's right over here. So yeah, check that out. But you can see, there's a quick shortcut to it. If you go to my main page of my bio and it just says Linktree, Chip Barnes. It's a clickable link at the very bottom of all my bio stuff, and it'll take you to a list, and the first one says TikTok backup. So it's a real easy follow. The other thing you want to follow that for is, I said something today. You kind of get a feel when things are getting shaky on TikTok, and I told somebody today, I doubt that this is going to be here in another week. I just get this feeling that it's coming. I don't know. It's like when you feel like you're going to get sick, and then it comes. You're like, oh damn. So the reason why you want to follow somebody's backup account is because if this particular account goes down, and you're not following the backup, when they go live again, you'll never see them until somehow one of their videos finally makes it back into your feed, which can take weeks. I've had people come back and say, hey, where'd you go? I haven't seen you in 3 weeks. If you follow my backup, you'll never have to say that, which I hope you will. So please do that. Yeah, and by the way, if you don't know much about Hezbollah, they are pretty badass, right? They are no joke. So again, in terms of air power, this is the big difference people don't get. Israeli air power is excellent. It's very very high-end equipment, very good radar, very good satellites. Everything's top-notch, right? It's great. Their combat troops are ill-equipped to fight against hardened fighters. They're just not that good. They do have a very small sort of, elite group of soldiers who do a lot of the training for other militaries and stuff like that. But their rank-and-file reservists suck. I mean, how could they possibly be good? They don't do any field training. They haven't been in wars, most of them. And they've been on the beach in Tel Aviv, 20 days earlier, and they've been on TikTok like this. Except they're not doing this. They're just bullshitting and making fun of Palestinians. Somebody says they're in the queue. What you have to do is, somebody says, pull me up, please. Interactive Brian, you have to first apply to be a guest so I can put you in the queue. I can't just pull you out of the, I can invite you. Let me see if you can come up that way. A little early for a guest, but I guess I can take it on. Somebody asked about the International Court. So there's a case being brought by South Africa to what's called the International Court of Justice. And it's different than the International Criminal Court. And it's the UN's highest sort of criminal activity. It's like raising to the level of crime. You gotta remember, this is the problem. They may be convicted, meaning they, the Israelis, or even the Americans in supporting this. But a conviction just is on paper. It's almost like when you get a judgment against somebody to get some money from them, right? So you get the judgment from the judge, great. Now you got to go collect the money. And that's the hard part. So you can get the conviction, which is like a scarlet letter on Israel as far as its standing in the world, which is already bad enough. But as far as enforcing it, let's say you have Benjamin Netanyahu, you have the defense minister, you have the finance minister, whomever you want to name as far as the intent to go after them. You have to get to the person. If they're in Israel, you're not going to go to Israel. You have to invade Israel to get to them. So if they travel to a country where they're a party to the treaty, then they can be arrested and maybe taken away to some sort of court. But the chances of that happening is very small. In fact, if you look at other examples, for example, Vladimir Putin, they put out an international arrest warrant for Putin, and other countries that are signatories to that system didn't arrest him, like African countries and stuff like that, because it's political. Let's face it. The guy's not guilty of crimes. He's guilty of being an opponent of the United States. So, did you want to come up, Brian? I invited you up, but I'll do it again. See if you come up there. Brian's like, bring me up. Okay, I'm bringing you up. Brian, what you might want to do if you can't get in, if you really want to come up, my suggestion is to exit TikTok, close out the app altogether, come back into the app, and then come back into the live. That usually works to get you back in if it's not working. Let me read. Sorry if I'm missing your comments, by the way. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to ignore you. Somebody says, your explanations and critical thinking are like no other. Well, that's very kind to say, because that's probably not true, by the way. Speaking of which, I appreciate the compliment. If you go to Twitter, which is my Twitter handle is just my name, Chip Barnes, I have a list, which will give you a reason why I say that, a list of really interesting people that I've found in my journey of learning, who I think are honest and straightforward and down the middle. And you can check them out. So I like to say a lot of what I've never learned anything on my own. I've either read books or watched YouTube videos or podcasts, and a lot of the people that I've learned from are on that list. So if you go to my Twitter, it's the first thing that's kind of posted at the top of my feed. We had a really good conversation on a live earlier today. Somebody's talking about the government being corrupt. Someone was asking me, who do you think? Yeah, I'm a veteran, Sally. I'm Army vet. They said, who do you think is going to be the best choice for president in 2024? Yeah, I'll get Rachel. I'll answer that next, okay? Good points. Okay, but let's talk about the presidential election for a second. So Right now, the primary candidates right now on the Democratic side is the incumbent Joe Biden. We all know what you're getting with him, right? Total Zionist, total, bought off and paid for, jackass. Then you have Donald Trump, who is the one who established the capital of Israel in Jerusalem. So think of that for a second. If he put the sort of the finger in the eye of the Palestinians by putting the capital of Israel in Jerusalem, it's like a smack in the face, right? So he's not going to be good for this issue. And then you have Bobby Kennedy, who's probably the third party candidate with the most traction, which very few have ever made much. All three of them are ardent Zionists. So at the presidential level for this issue, you got no room to breathe. It's just you're doomed one way or the other or the other. So that kind of sucks, right? And again, I keep saying what the path is to change this. There's so many obstacles that are so firmly entrenched. It's impossible to break them apart, in my estimation, through voting. Not that you shouldn't vote, just like you shouldn't recycle your cans and your bottles and whatever. But you know that just recycling itself isn't going to, keep the earth from being fouled, right? And so it's modern industrial consumer capitalism driven by fossil fuels and technology as well as a growing population, right, and a growing economy. That's what's causing ecological damage, not recycling. So obviously you can't change that unless you change that system, right? That system is causing the problem. Well, similar to the political dynamic, it is the system and those elements that are controlling that system that perpetuate that system. So it's heads they win, tails you lose. Pick your poison, right? But either way, you're not going to get much change. You might get. Listen, I've heard some women say, and this is right on the dot. One of the key powers that a president has is if one of the Supreme Court justices who serve a term for life decides to retire or they die, you get to appoint a replacement, right? That's a big power. So the balance of the Supreme Court in terms of how it adjudicates cases can be shifted dramatically depending upon what happens. And Trump, just out of pure chance, he got to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices. So in that regard, you got me on that one. And that affected women's issues, right? The right federally to protect a woman's right to choose to have, reproductive health care at her own whim was taken away. It's no longer federal, it's all state by state. And if you're a woman who lives in a state, you're no longer protected by that federal protection. It's now determined by the state legislature. And if you're a woman living in a state you don't have much money and you get pregnant and you want to not have a child, now you have to find a way to get to a place where you can legally deal with that issue. And that might cost you $500 plus what you have to pay to get it done. It might be $1,500 to do the whole. You don't have $1,500, right? Most people don't have $500 sitting around. So, again, I'm not for the issue because I know a lot of people have different strong feelings about that. I'm just saying that that's the predicament in which some women can find themselves where a presidential election might make a difference. That's what I'm trying to make. But for these major issues like money, taxation, business policy, foreign policy, control, power consolidation, that's not going anywhere, right? And look what happened in the civil rights movement. It was still pushed against hard by the establishment, but it was allowed to happen because it didn't completely disrupt those key dynamics. But if you're coming at people with one of those changes, look out. I'm telling you, they take it seriously. And any perceived threat, again, when you're a small fish like me, I'm some guy on TikTok talking to 140 people on a Monday. Basically, in their eyes, I'm a nobody, right? I don't have any traction. But look at guys like Russell Brand and Jimmy Dore and Tim Pool and guys like Joe Rogan. They have big audiences, right? Anywhere from 5 to 15 million. Hi, Lipri. And then what do? Those people are significant because they have a much broader reach. They have traction. So if they start saying things, Kim's great too. Kim Iverson's wonderful. I've met Kim, nice person, and very smart, by the way. Kim's amazing. She's on the list that I told you about on my Twitter. She's great. Anyway, so the point is that there are many ways to look at it, but every angle that I've looked at it, I don't see a path through voting because of the control systems that are in place, and they're so strongly embedded. It's like, I don't even know how to say it. It's like being in a straitjacket, right? Try going to pull the levers on the vote when you have a straitjacket on. It's like you just can't. And also, you add a 500-pound pack on your back, and you're on the couch with a straitjacket on. What the hell are you going to do there? Like your hands are literally tied and you got a weight on your back. And then somebody says, go climb Mount Everest. You got to get there by noon. That's what it's going to take to overcome all these power structures. It's that bad. And so I have no expectation that anything's going to happen. But I know what it would, I have a good idea of what it would take because you're seeing it right now. I don't know if you've been seeing the news, but in very many places, there are people right now for the Palestine issue, for Gaza, that are sitting, putting their bodies in the way of like highway traffic. And all these major arteries of transport are being cut off and blocked. And people get really inconvenienced, they get really mad, people that are just going back and forth to work or trucking companies or whatever, that their whole day is being inconvenienced or messed up. And that's the point. And people will say on Twitter, well, you're not doing anything right by your cause by doing that. Yeah, yes, you are. You're angry right now. That is the point. You're talking about it. That's the whole point of this, right? So the bottom line is disruption, civil disobedience that's nonviolent is the way to go, right? Now, ultimately what happens is something sparks, usually by either agitators in the crowd, which are put in by others, or the establishment responds back and something happens and harm comes to someone, and then people see that. And most people get pissed when they don't want to see innocent, peaceful people getting harmed. And that opens up more eyeballs. Just like we're seeing right now, the exact same emotional response where you're like, holy smokes, I can't believe this is allowed to happen. Same thing if you see a bunch of people getting hit with pepper spray or rubber bullets and they're all getting, whatever, stuff running out of their face, the whole thing. So, but more and more that's happening right now. I don't know if you noticed, but the news is showing it somewhat. But protests and or literally people sitting in front of stuff, that's good. That's people taking what they can do and doing what they can. And that's what people need to start doing, is recognizing that we do have some power and how it can be brought to bear. Now, when you do that, you can't have a litmus test that says, oh, you voted for Trump, you can't come out. You voted for Trump, you can't come. Or you're a woke person, you want transgender people to be able to use everybody's bathrooms, right? You can't come out. No, that stuff's got to sit on the sidelines while people look at the issues they have in common. Most people don't want to have money in politics. Most people don't want to have lobbying organizations. They definitely don't want corporations to be people, and they don't want money to be speech, and they don't want to have super PACs and lobbying agencies like AIPAC. And they want to have health care, because for Christ's sakes, why should all that money go to private insurance companies and healthcare companies, right? That money needs to go to help people, and maybe some reasonable stipend for certain people in society that need help. But take all that money that's going outside the country and bring it back to help people domestically, right? Yeah, we want to help people in situations where they need help outside the country because we want to be kind and generous. But all this stuff for militarism and stuff like that, no. That's all to meet somebody else's broader objectives in the power structure. No, it doesn't help the people. So I think most people can agree on most of those things. So you set those up as your desire, just like a union when you're trying to work something out with the company, right? Same idea. Now a union has a fund, so people who are doing this would need to have a fund. Someone could get arrested, you got to bail them out. Someone could have a house payment they can't make, you got to help them. So blah, blah, blah. It's called mutual aid. So if and when that takes off on a bigger scale, and the number that they say in these different books you read about this is, it says you need about 3.5% to 4% of the population to do this stuff, right? And if you get that number, that's a critical mass that'll make a big enough of a difference. So that's not a huge number. It's like 11 or 12 or 15 million people out of close to 340 million people in the United States. And it doesn't just have to be in the United States. Most Europeans are much more mindful of using protest and massive numbers of people to express their grievances and to resolve them with their government. French, especially, I mean, they were going to change the retirement age by 2 years from 62 to 64, and they freaked out. I mean, millions of people came out in the street to protest, and they stopped it. So, interesting how that works. Okay, we have a couple guests in the queue. I'm sorry for talking all night. We have Ifran and then Nabil Tak. I can't remember. They were a camel person left.
Hi there, Chip.
Hi there.
Thanks for having me on. So just going on from what you were saying, and this is kind of a intense question, but what do you think would be the responsible thing for U.S. citizens to do in this next election? I mean, who should we be putting down? Because I don't want to resign myself and say I don't want to vote, We've got to keep doing something. But yeah, given what choices we have, what do you suggest we do?
Well, I've said this many times. You can go vote. I mean, it's not a horrible thing to do it. Doesn't like cost you any money, and you can go do it. But the problem I think is that Americans. There's two problems. Americans have been pacified into believing that their path to changing things for the better are through elections. So they're told that over and over again. So in terms of their civic duty and their involvement in the quote unquote democracy, that's their role. And so as long as they go through that role, they've done what they're supposed to. That's the end of the process, right? There's no other path. That's what you have to do, right? Well, that's not true. That's just what we're told as far as the system and what it allows within the confines of how the system is structured. But life isn't the system, life is life, right? The system is imposed upon life by our government in terms of how they want us to operate. But it's that operating system no longer serves the public and hasn't for a long time, let's be straight. So you can go and vote and you can pick, whoever you hate less or whoever you like more. But in the end, most issues aren't going to change one bit by doing that. We know that from history, right? Why is it going to be different this time? I would even argue, as I've said before, you could take all 535 representatives and senators out, throw them out on their ear right now. They're gone. They're done, and bring in all new people. And the same system that holds everybody through the same problems is going to be there the same. It's not going to change. I call it the mud pit. So, there is no there. What I'm getting at, there is no easy answer to that question in terms of it making a difference. But some people think that Trump is going to be the savior. He's going to make America great again, which I think is silly. Because even if the president was going to do everything that you and I wanted the president to do, they still have the Congress to get through, which is bought and paid for by the special interests, right? So it's not, even a president can't do everything. That's why it's a system of checks and balances. But the only problem is that the checks and balances have been bought by others to check and balance what they want and not help the public. And that's the problem. So I do not believe that most Americans are ready to face that reality, even if they're aware of the problems that we're even talking about in the first place. But let's just say they were. Most people aren't willing to go, well, geez, I got to do something more than vote. I don't think so. It just sounds a little scary, right? And look, there's legitimate risks, right? You have your mortgage, you have your rent payment, you have your kids to think of, maybe whatever your life is, you have pressure on you, right? As a man or a woman to go out and make money. And doing something like this is completely out, off the reservation from what you're used to doing. And somebody asks, hey, you want to come to this thing with me? We're going to stand in the belt. We're like, no, that's crazy, right? That's 99% of people. So to build a movement, a union is different in that people work at the company. They all have common interest and it's more omnipresent. But this is a bigger issue that people aren't necessarily connected with in terms of how they feel towards it. So the first step is going to be raising that awareness. Just like you have to raise awareness within a union to get people to sign up and say, yeah, this is in our best interest to do this, to put the money in and to work together. Then after you build consensus on that, you have to build coalitions of people who are like-minded with that awareness to identify with the things we've been talking about, which is the escalatory means as well as the desired outcomes based on a consensus. And then you got to get enough people to actually take the actions necessary along that escalatory path, whatever they may be, and see how it goes. And I think getting people out of their lane and into that lane is going to be very difficult for Americans who aren't used to participating for the most part in protest. I can tell you nobody else in my circle, in my whole life that I know of, has been to a protest. I don't know one. So I don't know how many people you know. You're probably more motivated than others about these kind of issues. Most people on a Monday night right now, you know what they're doing? They're watching the national football, the college championship, right? I guess it's going on tonight. I think it's Washington versus, who was the other team? I don't remember. Anyway, they're the number one, Michigan. Michigan versus Washington. It's probably going on right now. Maybe it starts at 9 o'clock. I don't know. That's what Americans are doing. Or they're on a TikTok live watching somebody go, Rose smells so good. Rose smells so, whatever that shit is. This is what people do. They tune out because they're usually not that happy about their life anyway. America's a tough place to live right now. You have to work a lot. So the point I'm trying to make is people are disassociated with reform because of their own difficulties. And even if everybody identified it tomorrow morning, just getting people to have the courage and the willingness and the ability to step outside their lane to do something is less likely, right? So if it's going to happen, it's going to require a lot of people like you and I and others that are very motivated to kind of get them out of their complacency and then get their ass moving. And that's where leadership comes in, and that's difficult. Let's face it, right? And it's also very uncomfortable to say to somebody, hey, you don't understand this. Let me teach you. Or like, I don't want to hear that shit. And then if they do get it, you're like, well, you need to come out Saturday and do that. Like, I don't want to go. People will tell you they're going to go too. This is the other part I've learned. You get 100 people that tell you they're coming out on Saturday to go stand, and you'll get 3 that'll come. That's just the way humans are. I don't know why. You know, it's funny. The same thing goes. I know I always beat a dead horse, but the same thing goes for my backup. This is how it's so consistent. I ask people to follow my backup account. I have 107,000 followers, and I have like 4,000 that follow my backup. So those are the numbers, right? Just the way people are. I don't understand it, but it is what it is. So, did you want to add anything else, or did I cover enough for you, or what?
Oh yeah, you've actually answered my question perfectly. It seems like the small daily things to resist and show a voice is way more impactful than just that one November 4th, voting line. Yeah, it's going to be small daily work. So yeah, thank you, Chip.
You're welcome. Thanks for being on. I
Of
appreciate you.
course.
Yeah, somebody in the chat said, um, despite your pessimism, I appreciate your point of view. Listen, I'm not being pessimistic because I want to be negative because I'm not that I'm not looking at the opportunities. I'm just saying from a realistic standpoint, based on what I've observed in my lifetime, and maybe people have a different observation. But I've done political organizing before, both at the presidential level, as well as the state level, as well as the local level, all three. And you just learn people's behavior patterns and what they are or aren't willing to do by just going through those processes. So, I wish I had a different view, and I hope to God I'm wrong, right? You want to see good things happen. I'm for better outcomes and for more working people in society as well as nature, right? I mean, we got to figure out a way to make that work too. So, but remember that the system is engineered purposely to keep people doing what they're doing and not question the bigger picture stuff or make it feel like it's just too big of an issue to overcome. It's just this learned helplessness, right? So if you went and talked to 1,000 people right now, my guess is you'd be like, why is it, what's it worth? Why deal with it? It's not going to work. Just got to keep on going as best we can and try to hope for the best, right? Well, hope in that case is actually a bad thing because hope won't change anything, right? Hoping for a better outcome. That's actually the enemy of action, right? So I'm not hopeful, but I'm open to the idea of action being something as a tool to change the dynamics that we're talking about. And most Americans aren't used to getting off their couch and protesting. They'll go to a football game, they'll go to a soccer game, they'll go to a bar and drink beer or whatever. But in terms of just political stuff, now, there are some people that go to Trump rallies. That makes them more political. And there are not many people that go to Biden rallies. I don't think they even have a Biden rally. Obama used to have some, but people on the right are more protest oriented and more. I saw on January 6th, right? And guess who has most of the guns in this country? The firearms. I don't know if I'm supposed to say guns. The firearms are the things that people use to fire a projectile across to some other person or thing. So if they're the ones that are more willing to step up and organize and come out when they're angry, well, what do you think? If things get difficult, guess what? So, by the way, I saw a video today which was very unsettling, and they talked about the top 10 countries that has the most firearms per person. And there was like one that had 30, and it goes from like 25 to 35. This is per 100 people. And the United States was 132. I think the other country closest to it was 61 or 65 or something like that. So we have more than double the next highest nation in terms of firearms per person, per capita. There's more guns than people. So there's 330 some million people. We have about 470 million firearms. It's a lot of firearms, right? And if the S hits the fan, well, people that have those things are going to use them to their advantage, right? So it does sound a little bit disconcerting. Okay, we have more guests in the queue. Okay, Interactive Brian was in there, and then we have Sally, and we have Khalid1X.
Oh my God, thank you so much. Oh my God, what is going on in the world in terms of geopolitics? I read an article written by Patrick Venter that, am I audible? Did you guys hear me?
Yeah.
The UK is facing accusation of double standard after formally submitting a detailed illegal arguments to the International Court of Justice in Hague 6 weeks ago to support the claim that Myanmar committed a genocide. Oh my God! Against
Uh,
Rohingya ethnic group through the mass mistreatment of children systematically, depriving the people from their home and food. What is going on with the UK right now? Is it really
well,
a
I
Myanmar?
can you before you go, you said that so quickly, and I apologize. I didn't understand. You said that the UK is been accused of what? Can you say it a little more
Double
slowly?
standard, yeah. After formally submitting a detailed legal argument to the International Court of Justice in a Hague, you know, Hague is the international organization. Do you heard about Hague?
But what? Yeah, I'm just asking. What was the nature of the claim, or what are you trying to refer to? That's what I'm asking.
So the UK proclaimed that the Myanmar genocide.
I'm not catching what you're saying. Can you say it more slowly?
Oh, okay. Sorry for that. Maybe my internet problem, or there was an
No,
argument.
it's the fact that the pace of your speech is like 10 times normal. We can't understand what you're saying.
Oh, okay. Did you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. The UK is facing an accusation of double standard after formally submitting a detailed legal argument to the International Court of Justice in The Hague 6 weeks ago to support a claim that Myanmar committed a genocide against Rohingya.
Oh,
You know the country name Rohingya?
you're saying Myanmar, the country that used to be called Burma.
Myanmar, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. That's what I wasn't hearing.
And the conflict is going right now. The case is in the International Court of Justice. So, in terms of geopolitics, where is the world right now? Where are we at?
Well, obviously, it's just like with Ukraine and Russia. The same has been levied against the U.S. for being inconsistent. It makes sense because the British are supporting what's going on with respect to Israel, which is obviously the same type of horrific behavior that constitutes the same thing, and yet what the British are against in Myanmar against the Rohingyas is a double standard. I agree, it's a double standard. It makes total sense because they're on the one case they're condemning a behavior from one group to another. At the same time, they're supporting the same type of behavior of one group versus another. They've got it
Right.
flipped.
So again, the UK submission on Myanmar argues there is a low threshold for determining a genocide if the damage has been inflicted to the children, so opposed to the adult. The submission said that the action that could be defined as a genocide if systematic include forced displacement from homes, deprivation of medical services, and imposition of substantial diets. Israel will
Okay.
define itself to the UN. Deprived, mistreating has been seeking to protect the civilian population in an attempt to destroy the Hamas, but not the Palestinian people. It says it post war.
Okay, Brian, I got to stop you. Listen, I don't know if you know this or not. I think you've been on a few times, so you probably should. There's certain keywords that the AI system picks up on that will shut down the live,
Oh, sorry.
which we don't want to have. So, no, let me finish. Give me a sec. So the words like G side, you can say G side. You can say things like unalive instead of the KILL. You can say H group, stuff like that. So if just try to keep the sensitive words out of the conversation as best you can. It's making me wait 55 seconds to bring you on. I tell you what, I'm going to bring you back on in a second, Brian. Just give me a sec here. This is not at all to be discriminatory, but I will say this in terms of Brian. Maybe the audience is different. I have a very, very, very difficult time trying to understand what Brian says, and I want to be able to give everybody a chance to be on the show. But if you do speak with a strong dialect or foreign accent, which is understandable, I don't speak your language, which I'm glad you speak English. Just try to slow it down so I can perceive what you're saying, so I can respond to you. Okay. We have Sally, then G-Town Motors.
Hi, Chip.
Hi.
I have a couple of questions, please. As a veteran, how do you evaluate the performance of the IDF? Like, the army that claims to be the fourth strongest army in the world, yet they
Yeah.
are able to enter a 360 kilometers area like the Gaza Strip. I would like to know your views on that, and I also have another question.
Okay, we'll start with that one. Okay, so I'm going to defer to Scott Ritter, who's an analyst that I follow online. If you don't know who Scott Ritter is, he's a former UN weapons inspector, knows a lot about military history, military tactics, evaluating military events like we're seeing right now. He did a lot of coverage of the Ukraine war, still does, and he's added his 2 cents to this one, and I did a video on it today actually. But so Scott understands that there's a small, very well-trained force, maybe 8 or 10,000 members of the Israeli forces, much like we have like the Rangers or the Green Berets, that kind of a similar thing, or the SEALs, Navy SEALs, where they're well-trained, they're well-equipped, and they've probably fought in previous combat, right? But that's not a big force, right? They're fighting a force between 25 and 50,000 people. We're not really sure how many are in the age group that are militant. So it's, significant fighting. The people that are coming in as reserves to back up those troops, the ones that are on the ground but basically moving in the tanks and the personnel carriers and the infantry that are supposed to go in and do this stuff, they're not well-trained fighters. They're weekend warriors. We have people in our country called the National Guard. And in their place, they have what are called, they're conscripted for 2 years, they're required, or 3 years, they're required to serve in the military. And if a conflict like this comes up, they get called up. They get basic training. But these are not hardened full-time soldiers that practice maneuvering and shooting and all that stuff. And, they're just not that good. And so Scott Ritter has called them a joke. And he says that they are completely fundamentally incapable. This is on the ground side, not the air side. Totally different story in the air. But on the ground side, they're a joke. They have people that are in the positions. It takes you 8 to 10 years of very strong full-time training to get the position of like a sergeant. Maybe 5 years, and they're giving people sergeant in 1 year or less.
What does
For
that
officers,
Israel as a country or as a state?
say that again. I didn't hear you.
What does that tell us about Israel as a country or as a state?
Well, in that case, it tells us that the way they structure their military is they're relying very heavily on a reserve force that is, dubious in terms of their quality, and they're relying on the fact that they won't have to use it other than the things they've been able to do to go in and basically pound the hell out of people periodically.
Thank you for that. I have another question. The war is not going to last forever, and it's going to end at the end of the day. What do you think is going to happen? Like, the American people do forget easily, and I'm afraid that the debate that has been sparked due to the Palestine war or due to what's happening in the Middle East in general is not going to continue, and they are not going to build on it in order to change the whole system, knowing that the whole system is corrupt. So what do you think should be happening in the country in order to keep that and build on it and just try to get results?
When you say the country, do you mean the United States?
Yes.
Well, we covered that a moment earlier. I don't know if you caught that part of the segment where we talked about the power structures that are preventing the elected officials to serve the constituents. They serve the power structures that are in place, unfortunately. So, those same power dynamics play out on the international stage, but you have a split that's taken place over the course of the last 5 years, where obviously Russia and China and now Iran are sort of semi-aligned with North Korea in their little power block. And then you have the US, Western Europe, the Western nations like Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Western Europe, they're sort of aligned in their power block. And the US is, of course, the leader of all that, obviously. And the US is still the dominant force worldwide. And there's some financial things that are fragmenting. There's a lot of variables going on. But it is shifting. And I think it's going to come to a head at some point. Because once you come to a head, all bets are off, right? Because the Chinese right now depend on US consumption for their goods. We depend on Chinese production for our corporations to make profits and sell stuff. So it's like a weird marriage right now. But the marriage is very tense. And at some point, there's going to be we have to talk about getting a divorce kind of thing. And it's not going to be pleasant. And I don't know how far off that is. No one can predict it. But I think it's inevitable. And the real wild card is nuclear weapons. Let's face it, that's the number one thing that could be our instant demise if that gets used, if those get used. My guess is they won't be. because they're just so devastating that nobody's crazy enough to do it, at least not in the nation states. But I could be wrong about that. And maybe it could be an accident where someone thinks they're detecting a launch, and because of some communication issues or errors in terms of radar, they fire back, but they weren't really fired on. And then that initiates the conflict. That's the biggest thing that I'm fearful of, is a mistake. But barring that happening, I don't see the power structures changing in the near future unless there's going to be a global war. And if there is a global war, unfortunately, I think the United States is going to find out the hard way that we're nowhere near the power that we were in terms of the military we had, let's say, 65, 70 years ago. Nothing like it. The nature of the people, the nature of the training, the nature of the willingness of the country, the quality, we're overconfident, just like the Israelis are. And we think because we're the United States, that just because we're the world's largest power, we have to win. No, you don't. And if you look at the average person right now that's enlisted, just go take a look at some of the videos of people that are enlisted in the military. They're not hardened soldiers. They're kids that want to get their scholarships paid for and want the bonus money. And they're hoping to God they can get out before something blows up. So, just like I mentioned with Israel, there are some elite units in the U.S. Army and other branches and in the Navy, but not nearly enough to last through a large conflict. Like, look what happened in Ukraine. They burned through most of their regular army pretty quickly, and then they had the conscripts, and now they're dealing with the table scraps of people they're pulling into the war, and it gets messy. And the same thing's going to happen with the United States if we get pulled in. These other countries have much larger, much better trained, much more willing participants in the war than we do. So I don't think it'll go well for us if we get into it, because I think the U.S. knows that. So they're doing everything they can to kind of play the chess game right now, trying to work it out in our favor. But we're in late stage empire. So we don't have a really good hand to play with. We have $34 trillion of debt. We have an overextended military system. We're out of control in terms of foreign militarism. We have a bunch of whack jobs that are running the country that are pushing all this, that are sympathetic to all the wrong people in the world, all for power and money. So it's kind of a gross last chapter that we're in. And unfortunately, the people at home are suffering because of it. And it's going to get worse, in my opinion, way worse, way faster for the average person. So I think choosing to stay in the United States over the next 10 or 15 years, it's going to be a very difficult life to deal with. And that's if there's no world conflict. If there's world conflict, I think we're finally going to get a taste of our own medicine on our own shores, which is not going to be fun.
Yeah, that's what I keep thinking. Like at one point, the United States will have to be humbled, like in some way. And they will realize finally that they are no longer the police of the world. So I'm hoping this comes just as smooth as the American people can handle. Thank you so much, Chip. I appreciate you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for being here. Yeah, it's kind of scary to think about that, right? I mean, the big wild card is what's going to happen right now. This could be the spark that starts something. Of course, these conflicts tend to break out regionally first, and then as time goes by, the different proxies get drawn in because of it escalating. And the next step in that puzzle, that chess game, is going to be Hezbollah. Let's face it. I mean, the Houthis only have so much power. They're further away. Hezbollah is right on the border, the northern border of Israel. And they could fight a ground war if they wanted to. I don't think they want to, but they could. And they'd probably win. And I think the Israelis know that. But then that would draw the Americans in. And they would use their 80,000 Marines that are stationed there to fight back. And that would be a tough slog for the Iranian-backed, Hezbollah militias. And it'd be a terrible conflict. But if Iran gets drawn in, then China's going to back Iran and so will Russia. And then all bets are off, right? But I don't think the Europeans want to go to war over Israel. It doesn't really benefit them. And remember who the people are that make up the power structures and decision-making trees right now that are in place. And it's not some big conspiracy. It's just what is. And I don't ascribe a benefit or a drawback to it. It's just what's real. I've done videos about this before when I first got started on TikTok. And there's a very small worldwide population of Jewish people. It's about 17 million who identify as being Jewish, ethnically or religiously or whatever. So, but if you look at the power structures that exist in Europe, in the United States and elsewhere, and the influences that take place, they're very heavily weighted from a very small percentage portion of the population. And I'll leave it at that. But the point is that you're not going to have people that are identify as that part of their history and their being that have sympathies to something. They're not going to want to change that in terms of the power structure that we're seeing right now around it. They're going to want to maintain that. So again, I always talk about what has to be broken up. And as much as I don't want to see things be disruptive and problematic, that is the path to changing that, because as long as it has the hold on it, it's not going to change, right? Makes sense. Okay. We have G-Town Motors, then Hunt for Truth, and then Pal Nada. G-Town Motors, I like that name.
Hey Chip, good evening.
Good evening.
How you doing?
Pretty good.
Just had a couple questions we could talk about. Sorry, it's my first time ever going live on TikTok, so if I forget a question, you know.
It's all good.
So
Take your time. It's all good.
so my first question is, and thank you for having me on, by the way.
Yeah.
Um, so with that new attack in Lebanon, that happened today by Israel. You think that could basically be the spark of just all these other countries just jumping in and just kind of making it an all-out thing?
No, I don't think it'll happen like that. I think that what's happening right now is this is a game of like, it's almost like when you're playing with a cat and you throw something on the floor and you pull it towards you a little bit, you're trying to get the cat to chase the thing. That's what's happening right now with Israel and Hezbollah. They're trying to draw Hezbollah into the conflict to have a two-front thing. Then they can say, oh, woe is me. Come on, U.S., help me out. And therefore the U.S., they're trying to get the U.S. involved. That's what it looks like right now. And remember, there are other things at play. So if you're McDonnell Douglas, or if you're Northrop Grumman, or you're Raytheon, or you're Boeing, or any of these defense contractors, you make absolute bank when things start to explode, start to proliferate.
Of course.
And as sick as that sounds, that people would want to do something like this to flare things up to make money off of conflict, it's very normal in those circles to do that, which is sad. So I don't know which forces are propelling it, but it's getting harder and harder for those on that side of the border to not do anything. The more they're provoked, but I think they're still maintaining a steady hand. There's some small skirmishes that are going on. A lot more aerial bombardment by the Israelis, but
No, 100%. I completely agree, and that kind of leads me to my next question. So basically the way I see it now is like Iran's kind of using Lebanon as is America's using Israel to kind of fund them and, fight the fight for them. So my next question is, if it keeps going back and forth, meaning they'll drag Iran in to help Lebanon, which will drag America in to help Israel. Do you think that could happen?
it could. Somebody in the comments said, "Why do I think that will draw the U.S. in?" Because if you don't know much about how the H group is, okay, we know that the Hezbollah, the H group has crude rockets that it's been firing in Israel for the last 15 years, but the munitions that Hezbollah has are totally different. These are serious, very well guided missiles that will get through the Iron Dome, and that will hit their targets, whether it be Tel Aviv, West Jerusalem, wherever. There'll be massive casualties and massive damage. And the Israelis know this. And so they kind of want, again, just like what happened on the 7th, people have different arguments as to why that happened or how it was allowed to happen or not or whatever. Again, it's all about instigating. And then look who's in power right now. Now, if things slow down inside of Gaza and they withdraw the troops, or at least go into some sort of administrative mode where they're going to either annex or just create some administrative structure in North Gaza, maybe they're already building a segmentation wall, it looks like, of some type to separate the North and the South. Well, what will that mean for Netanyahu? There's no longer full-time hostilities, right? So he's under the gun in a lot of ways. One, he's done. People hate him. But two, he's got huge corruption charges that could put him in jail for 20 years right now. And he's, 65, 70. So that's basically a life sentence. So he doesn't want conflict to stop. So there's a few forces playing out that may keep this thing going for the worst possible reasons.
Well, yeah, even Netanyahu came out today and said that this thing is going to go for all of 2024. So it was never about the hostages, It was never about the hostages, like he said. My
Yeah.
next question I got for you is, after this is all said and done, whether it be a couple months, couple of years, do you think that the U.S. will keep aiding Israel by financing them by the way that it is right now, whether it's 4 billion a year, or you think they're going to cut back a little bit since everybody,
They
even in
may
the
do
States, is
it.
kind of waking up to see the truth?
Yeah. What from a political standpoint, they may cut a little bit to give window dressing. Okay, we made a change or something like that. But I think the fundamental funding is going to stay in place unless the people in government who drive that are no longer there.
Yeah, but that's not gonna, most likely that's not gonna change.
Yeah, I mean Nancy Pelosi, if you don't know, she was the former Speaker of the House, a very powerful
Yeah.
Democrat. She said that, if the Capitol were to crumble to the ground, that's the building where they operate the Congress and the Senate,
Hmm.
the one thing that will remain resolute is our support and funding for Israel. That tells you
Yeah,
something.
yeah. And I don't know why the US is so head over heels with Israel. Like, I just can't understand it, you know? Um,
Well, yeah, I mean, it's got some strategic reasons, but it's got some other reasons as well. So think
yeah,
about it this
yeah.
way. When the US had to invade France in World War II, it didn't have a nice little landing spot, right? It had to battle its way towards the beaches, and it was horrific, the losses that the Americans took getting to that beachhead. Israel is a safe beachhead right now into the Middle East, which the U.S. desperately needs if it ever has to have a major conflict there. So it acts like a beachhead, and it's a very well armed policeman that the U.S. can sort of use as a proxy to control the neighborhood. And if you've
No,
noticed, up until when this happened, a lot of the neighbors were starting to make peace with or try to have accords with Israel, which the
yeah,
other forces didn't
100%.
either. So,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
again, it was sort of working out for U.S. interest until this exploded.
Yeah, yeah, no, I completely agree. I won't take up too much of your time. You probably have other people that are gonna get on with you. I just do want to add, coming from a Palestinian myself, is we don't have an issue with Jews. It's just the Zionists. I've met a lot of Jews that are really, really nice people, and they don't even agree with their own government. It's just the Zionists are the problem. And thank
Exactly.
you for speaking out and speaking up. And I've been watching your videos for a while, and I really appreciate it, Chip.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good
Thanks for
night.
coming on.
Yeah,
You
thank you.
too. Thanks a
Bye-bye.
lot. Yeah, I mean, once you learn something like this, whatever the situation is, once you see the dynamics and you realize someone's basically getting screwed, you kind of be a heel if you didn't talk about it, right? You should speak out just to be decent. Now, the question is, what are the political or personal costs of doing so? It depends on the regime you're in. I don't know if I lived in a repressive Russia back in 1940 that I would be speaking out, but who knows? But anyway, so we still have another guest in the queue. Yeah, let me just make that one more distinction because it's so important to make. And I've been doing this since the moment I started talking about these issues. I make this distinction as clear as I possibly can. Okay, there's a big difference between a Zionist person who's Jewish and who believes in the political ideology of Zionism, which unfortunately is not just the establishment of a safe homeland for Jewish people, which is a noble ideal, but they're willing to absorb whatever costs it takes to others to have it, in addition to all the things that are being done to those same others over the years to maintain it. Those are the people who follow and support Zionism that I have a problem with. If they so happen to be Jewish, there are people in the world that are Zionists that aren't Jewish, like Joe Biden, for example, and other politicians. But there are tons and tons and tons. Yeah, we've seen Hebrew Hammer. We'll talk about that guy. There are tons and tons of Jewish people around the world who don't feel the way that I just described. They're against the expansionist nature and the political ideology of Zionism, and they want peace. They want to have peace with their neighbors. They want a safe place for their fellow, their group of Jewish people they identify with. But they don't want to have fighting. They want to just make it work somehow. And the policies of the subsequent Israeli governments have been one that doesn't work for peace, right? Okay, we have Palinata coming on here. Palinata, I think I'm saying it right. Palinata, I hope.
Hey, Chip.
Hi,
Hey, how are you?
good, thanks.
Good. So my name is Neda.
Netta,
So think of the card Jetta, but with an N.
got it.
Yeah. So thanks for having me on. I started following you on Twitter first, and then whenever I saw you on TikTok, I was floored, and I immediately followed you.
Oh, thanks.
So my question is not from I don't have a military question. I'm sure you know that there's an ICJ hearing Thursday and Friday. I heard something really interesting today. A current member of the Knesset, his name is Ofer Kassif. He joined the South African team, basically citing that, he stands with, the Israeli people, and that's why he joined the South African team, because he knows that he represents the people and not the government, and that he knows that his government is absolutely committing genocide. I have two questions. One is, what do you think of a current sitting member of the Knesset joining? And then two, do you think that something will come out of the ICJ if there is a guilty verdict?
Okay, good questions. So let's take an example out of the U.S. playbook for a second for comparison. So for those of you who may not know, there's only one member of the U.S. Congress who's Palestinian American, and her name is Rashida Tlaib. She's a Democrat from Michigan that represents a sort of a suburb area of Detroit, Michigan. And she spoke out openly about her, she was critical of what the Israelis were doing as far as their response goes. And she was proactively pushing for pro-Palestine. She was a Palestinian. She's talking about her family members and her extended family and her people being treated so cavalierly in terms of what the Israelis were doing. And for that, she was admonished. In fact, she went through a formal process, which is called being censured. It's like going to the principal's office for Congress, where they kind of slap you with a sticker saying, bad, bad, bad Congresswoman, which is absurd, right? All she did was speak her mind, which should be part of free speech. But that's how the dynamic in Washington is. Well, very similarly, if you speak out publicly in Israel, anywhere, but especially if you're an elected official, you're going to get demonized for kind of going on the side of the enemy. So I expect that type of language to come out in like the Jerusalem Post and Times of Israel and stuff like that. We'll see, but that's my guess on that. It's hard to get reelected if you go against the grain. Now, as far as the second part you asked me about was as far as the ICJ, and will that make a difference if there is a conviction? I hope there's a conviction on as many counts as that are brought to bear, because I think that most likely, and I'm not a lawyer. I certainly don't know much about international law as far as what is guilty or not. But as far as a layman, I can tell you just everything as far as intent of what a lot of the government officials have said publicly, which is reprehensible, versus what they've done. The two line up. And so therefore it should meet the legal standard of they have to show intent. So I think they'll be able to do that. But getting the conviction is very similar to the scarlet letter that Rashida Tlaib has. It doesn't kick her out of the Congress. That would have to be an impeachment to get her out, or being expelled by a vote. That's not going to happen. Now, there will be a judgment against them. If they're convicted, there'll be a conviction. It'll stand. And any countries that are party to the ICJ, France being one that said they would stand behind the judgment, which is very surprising. I don't know if they really meant that, but maybe it's just symbolism. But if you travel if you travel outside your country into a country that is supportive of the ICJ network, if you're a signatory to the treaty, you're supposed to arrest that person, and then they go through the process of being sentenced and stuff like that. But the problem is, it's hard to get countries to do that because it's politically. I mean, imagine this. Imagine if Netanyahu traveled to France for vacation, or let's just say Smotrich. Yep, Netanyahu may be in jail. Let's say Smotrich, the finance guy, goes to France for a holiday with his family, and the French government is in this predicament. Well, do we arrest him, or then we have maybe some kind of crazy stuff from the Mossad in our country with whatever, or the U.S. putting pressure? I doubt it's going to happen. So I don't think it's going to have any teeth, although it will be a stain on the history of Israel to have this judgment against them if it does go through.
Yeah. So I was listening to a human rights attorney. His name is Francis Boyle, and apparently he single-handedly, he said that he won 2 cases at the ICJ, and it was for Herzegovina. I think it was against Yugoslavia. I may be wrong. But he basically said that after reviewing the paperwork that South Africa submitted, that they will most definitely win. And, I don't like absolute statements, obviously. I mean, I'm not an attorney, but these kinds of statements worry me a little bit because I want them
Yeah.
to be true. But still, I mean, if obviously there's merit to this claim, I think what worries me is what you just said, which is South Africa wins, but nothing happens. The bombardment continues. Israel is going to continue to act with impunity. More people in
Yep.
Gaza are unalive. Like that, I'm a Palestinian, so that, I mean, I worry for my people, regardless of whatever the United Nations says, whatever, regardless of whatever the ICJ says. I feel like
Yeah.
unless the United States takes a stand and they say enough is enough, I don't think anything is going to change, sadly. I only hope, but I'm not trying to be a pessimist here, but I feel like I've been on this earth long enough to know, what Israel does. And I feel like they just don't care.
Well, yeah, not everybody in Israel. The government right now that's currently in power and their supporters. Yeah, I agree with you there. They're definitely going with total impunity, and I don't even think they'll listen to the Biden administration at this point. In fact, I think members of the Biden administration, while they'll say things publicly, what happens behind closed doors is a totally different conversation.
Yeah.
So I think they're committed to continuing this. They say they're trying to get the H group out, but they're not going to root out every age group member unless they forcibly remove every citizen and they flatten the place and they literally go through every single inch of every single tunnel. That's the only way to do it. And I don't think they're going to get away with doing that, because then I think something would happen for sure. So it's interesting to see what's going to happen. I think you're right about that. And unfortunately, it would be better if there was justice in the world, right? But
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks for your time. I don't want to
yeah.
stay on, but I appreciate you talking to me.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks. Bye.
Somebody asked me about, do I have any legal experience because of what's in my kitchen? I don't know what that means. To chip your font, have any legal experience? I mean, no, I have a father that was a lawyer and a grandfather that was a judge. That's about the extent of my legal background. There was a comment that came through from someone. It was in all caps. Let me go back and look at it. I took a screenshot of it. It said, this is the person's name. It says, Israel will win. I don't know if it's a bot or a real person. But if you want to come up and talk, I'd love to have you talk. It says, without a doubt, the IDF is the most moral army in the world. I don't know if that's comedy or if that's actually a true statement, but it strikes me as comedy. So I'll treat it like comedy. But if you don't know, Benjamin Netanyahu has gone out in front of his podium and said that the world's most moral army is Israel, because they go out of their way to avoid civilian casualties. I mean, that is so absurd, but it's what they tell the public in Israel, to make them feel as if what they do is justified because they go out of their way to avoid problems and therefore they're righteous. And there are examples, by the way, where the Israelis do drop flyers, okay? Or they drop these little, whatever they call little ticker tapes with notices. And they do sometimes warn people to come out of buildings, like hospitals, for example. They've done that. But in terms of saying you're moral, if you drop leaflets or whatever, yeah, thanks for the information. You drop leaflets, let's say, in 5% of the structures that you destroy, and the other 95% you don't. You just hit them out of the blue. Well, I mean, you can claim that you drop leaflets. Yeah, that's technically true. But if you only do it once or twice out of 100 strikes, what does it mean? That doesn't mean you're being moral. It means you're being immoral, right? Now, I've got hundreds of videos that show no leaflets, no warning, just boom, whole large buildings being knocked over or multi-structure buildings being exploded from weapons. So that's not moral, right? And these buildings do not have H group members in them. We always hear that same argument. Well, our military only targets structures with known or probable H group members in them. That's why we do it, right? And it's unfortunate that they're civilians, but the reason why the civilians go is not because it's our fault, but because the H group forces them to stay there in order to make us look bad, and they use them as human shields. That's the argument that we hear, okay? So people said, okay, we hear you. Let's check this out. So Amnesty International analyzed the last two major incursions in 2015 and 2018 into Gaza and looked at that claim in all the instances where civilians died. And they found zero evidence of H group members embedding themselves or having equipment in the places that were destroyed by Israel. So This is two different investigations by an independent group that doesn't have any relationship with either party, that doesn't have a reason to lie. They're an independent group that does analysis in all over the world. So you can check that out if you want to. Just Google that if you want to. So again, the claims are nothing without substantiation. So we heard at the very beginning of the conflict, and again, this is where it gets hard to trust somebody, right? 40 babies. Very first thing we heard the first day, it got broadcast everywhere. 40 babies, oh my God, they're missing everybody said it, right? Well, where's the evidence for that? Oh, no evidence. No, sorry. And even the Israeli journal media system had to announce there's nothing to substantiate that. It was just something somebody said. It was a journalist said she heard it from somebody, she repeated it, became fact to the world, and then I've got nothing to it. Then we were told people were roasted alive, right? That didn't happen. Then we've heard about all these grapings that went on. Well, people claim there's evidence that they've seen the videos, but they haven't shared the videos for people to confirm the allegations. Now, I can understand the argument that you don't want to have to show videos of people who are going through something as horrific as that if it happened. And I also understand that not all of them may have been videotaped, right? There may have been some instances where somebody's personal account is what came back. But the problem is that the Israelis and their representatives have lied so frequently over the years about so many things, including during the conflict here. They've staged different things, like, for example, in the Al-Shifa hospital, they staged what's called a go bag, which is a duffel bag full of military equipment behind an MRI machine, which couldn't have happened because you can't have metal within 50 feet of an MRI machine for it to work properly. And they took video of the bag showing a single rifle, and then they took photographs. Well, somebody else came in to take pictures. There was a second rifle in the bag. That's just one example of many. There was a computer that they said they found that was evidence of the H group having plotted all these things. It was an Israeli laptop that only works in Israel. I mean, it's absurd, sloppy, third-grade propaganda. And they've done it over and over. And they tell their public, hey, we found this stuff in this building. This is evidence that they're using this. They have it in schools. They have it in hospitals. It's all BS. It's all staged crap. This is what these people do. They stage a lot of stuff. They are actors. And then they lie about it. And that's how they confuse their public to believing all this crap, that they're the good guys. Okay? And that's what they do over and over. Now, there may be instances where what they're saying is true. I don't know for sure. But if you lie 99 times and one time out of 100 you tell the truth, it's hard to expect the public, no, I'm telling you the truth, I swear. Well, you said that 99 other times. How can I believe this one, right? It's completely silly. So my suggestion to the Israelis is tell the truth for once. Tell the truth for once. Admit the things you're doing, and then be honest about the things the other guys are doing, and we'll listen to you. But as long as you're going to lie through your teeth and make stuff up and play the victim when in fact you're the victimizer, I don't want to hear it. Garbage. Yeah, the boy who cried wolf. Exactly, Tom. Exactly. So anyway, yeah, and I've done a lot of videos about that, by the way. If you haven't seen it, I mean, a great example in one of my more recent videos, I actually saw this person from the first week of the conflict. There was a young woman, long dark hair. She had a hurt right arm, or I guess you can see it this way, her right arm. And so she had a cast on. She had been taken care of by a doctor in the tunnels or wherever she was being held, and her arm healed. I don't know if it was a break or some kind of a bad sprain or something, but about a month and a half later, that she was one of the first people released. And they showed her in the vehicle with the Red Cross, which is the person she was released to, is the Red Cross. And there was no more H group. They were gone. Right? And they filmed her and they asked her, so how were you treated? Like, what happened? She was like, they were very nice. They were very kind. Food was good. They took good care of me. That's what she said at the moment she was released, right? Now, fast forward 5 or 6 weeks later, she's back in Israel. She's doing a TV interview. This is in my video. And it shows her saying the exact opposite. It was horrific. It was my own personal Holocaust, she said. It was women and children running around. They were, they're embedded themselves. They were just all the same stuff, right? And just a complete 180 of what she had said honestly when she first talked. So it's always the same game. Lie. obfuscate, confuse the truth, misinform the public. We're the good guys. They're the bad guys. We're the victim, even though we're victimizing the other. We're the subject of a G-side because someone in a document somewhere 15 or 20 years ago said they didn't want us around, but we're doing it to somebody in real life, and yet we're still the victim. It's that. It's this. What? Say what? What? It's just insane. It's insanity. So I don't know what drives that, other than the fact that I keep saying that the behavior is indefensible. Now, somebody mentioned this person named Hebrew Hammer. Hebrew Hammer. This is somebody who is not a dumb guy. I've watched enough of his lives to know that he's not a stupid person. He knows a lot about history, as far as ancient history, reels off all these facts about this, that, and the other. I tend to discount the weight of that type of conversation when it comes to this issue, because what matters to me is who was living there between like 1750 and 1948, the last couple 300 years. That's what matters to me. Anybody can go back 2,000 years. I could go back to the dinosaur age and say that a Tyrannosaurus Rex has to come get your house because it was their land when they were alive, right? You can go back as far as you want, right? That's absurd. But this guy, Hebrew Hammer, and whoever else he works with, there's this guy named Captain Jonathan who also does this stuff. They've devised a t-shirt. And on the t-shirt, it says 67.9. And they're selling these t-shirts. Now, this is how, in my opinion, how disgusting people can be. And what 67.9 refers to is the IQ, or the perceived IQ, of Palestinian children with mental disabilities. And they use that to say that Palestinians are basically, subpar. And so they have a t-shirt made up that has in large letters 67.9, as if Palestinians and Arabs are completely inferior to them, the chosen people. And they wear it with pride as if it's a way of indicating their superiority. I think that's absolutely disgusting. They also have a t-shirt, which I showed on here a while back. I don't know if you were here for it, but it shows a Palestinian woman, and she's wearing her traditional, her covering, and she's got a big baby bump. You can see she's very late stage pregnancy. And in one hand, she's holding up a rifle, as if most pregnant Palestinian women are carrying rifles, right? I mean, it's pretty silly. And then they have a crosshairs over top of her baby bump. And it says at the bottom, it's in Hebrew, but it says 1 shot, 2 unalives, but with the real word. 1 shot, 2 unalives. That's a t-shirt they sell, and they promoted for a while with the IDF. That is what these people are all about. They are vile, self-centered, arrogant supremacists that think they're it. And it makes me sick, because I don't think anybody is it, right? None of us. So, okay, we have somebody here who's a regular and has her own good content. Her name is Sister Libre. She sent me a very, very interesting email today, or actually it was a big message, and it was sort of a letter that we can resend to this ICJ. I believe that's what it was. But let's bring her up and see if she's talking about that or something else.
Hey Chip, how are you?
Hey.
How, so I was originally going to come on and ask you what you thought about the connection to Epstein, and how Dershowitz, who is representing Israel in this ICJ case, represented Epstein and is on the Epstein list like 200 something times. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, I am. Alan Dershowitz is a total liar. He's a scum. You know what? He's bottom of the barrel. He's a bad dude. He's a liar. He's disingenuous. He's trying to say that he has nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein other than having worked for him. And of course, as soon as he found out he is just a serial liar.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible that they had this, that Epstein was an agent and that he was blackmailing these leaders? I mean, it seems very conspiracy theory, but very plausible.
No, it's a honey trap. It's the oldest trick in the book. And what they do is they get you using on some sort of sexual attraction with somebody, whether it be, what I would call traditional heterosexual or some other, or underage, which is the one I think they're talking about here, is people engaging in different acts, lewd acts with underage people. Then they have them on film and to use it as leverage or to compromise people to have their way. And it gets done at all levels of intelligence. It's not unique to Jeffrey Epstein or Mossad, but it happens
Yeah.
all the time. And then people get compromised, and then they have to do things they would never do.
It's completely crazy, but also the fascinating connection with Blinken being the stepson of, I want to say it was the attorney who represented Epstein. So there's actually a connection between Blinken and Epstein that I wasn't
Yeah.
aware of. I don't know if everybody else was aware.
Yeah.
But back to that letter that I sent you, which was, so for anybody on the live, there's if anybody's interested, there's a way to kind of communicate with the ICJs. Somebody sent this to me, and I've sent it to Chip and others to try to advocate for. To one, it gives you a way to watch the ICJ trial, which I think we know that we're being like, even if we go on Google, things are censored. Like last night when Motaz was on Mehdi Hassan, I don't have cable at home, so I tried to watch it. And when I Googled it, I couldn't find anything. And I think that's purposeful. So it might be hard for us to watch the trial. So if anybody's interested in that, like, you can feel free to DM me or request me. Currently my content's for followers only, but I do a lot of Palestinian content. Feel free to reach out if you want that link or how to help to advocate for the Palestinians with the ICJ. What did you think
Yeah,
of that?
so what you want to do is, well, what I would suggest you do if you're watching is just tap on that box in the lower right hand corner or lower, whatever it is, and just follow Sister Libre, and then you'll be able to message her to get it or whatever she sees, whatever she suggests.
Yeah. Yeah. That'd be great. And I'm trying to think if there's been any other recent developments. I mean, just as you were talking about the hatred, I thought of when you were talking about that Hebrew Hammer, which I haven't seen, because I honestly, when I see these lives and these conversations happening with Zionists, there is
Yeah.
definitely a trend. They interrupt, they bully, it's the same thing over and over. And then when you see, I don't know if you follow his name, but his name is Hamza Absorber, I think is his name on Instagram. He does these lives, and for some reason he ends up talking to a lot of IDF soldiers. And every single time they come on bragging about how many Palestinian kids they've unalived.
Yeah.
It's truly, truly disturbing. But yeah, I mean, they've proved themselves to be horrible, horrible. So anyway, thank you for all you do, Chip.
Sure.
And creating these spaces and these lives, because it's weird time right now, and I know a lot of us have family and friends who think we're crazy for being so invested in this. So people like you make us feel a lot less alone.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad that that's the case. I wish I could do more,
Yeah. Well, thanks for everything, Chip, and I'll let go in case you have someone else.
All right, great. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. Yeah, I don't know. I wish there was more we could really do. You think about what people are enduring right there. For those of you who haven't been in places like the military where you haven't really had to go out and deal with like hardship, it's no fun to be in a place where it's cold, wet, rainy, you're underfed, you're feeling sick, and whatever else people are enduring. I heard some people are getting hepatitis A, which is very contagious. It's awful. They don't have the basics of life. A lot of people don't even have food right now. So, it's just, it's bad. Okay, Freedom Philistine is here. Freedom Philistine's been a regular at times, so let's see what's going on. Hello?
Hello.
Okay. Oh, okay, there you are.
For that young lady, I wasn't able to follow her. Maybe she can follow me. That way, she can send the link, or you can send it to me on Telegram. I believe you have my Telegram, Chip.
Yeah, I'll probably put it onto one of the Telegram channels and I'll announce it. I'm not sure which one. Maybe I'll create a separate group just to put it on there.
Yeah, I have no doubt in my mind that everybody's compromised. And if you look at the list of Epstein, you got a lot of them that are in the news media, a lot of them that are, stars and stuff like that. So, within their own realm, they're making sure everybody stays complicit with them.
Yeah, I mean, imagine yourself right now if you were working in politics and you got invited to a party and it was down on this like, special island where you kind of go off for the weekend, you just kind of just enjoy yourself and kind of put your life behind you, especially if you're married and you go down by yourself. It's just for a guy, it's like this terrible temptation and they play into that, I guess. And, I don't know what else people are into. I mean, thank goodness I have no attraction to underage people. I would hate it if I did, but some people do. And some people engage in that, and especially if somebody kind of tees it up for you and makes it really easy and says no one's going to know about it or whatever they said. And then, of course, they film it. And then later you find out that you get pictures sent to you and they say, we'll be in touch. They'll stay private. We'll be in touch. That's all you got to say. And people know that that's that, right?
And Epstein, when Obama spoke how, he was trying to push a peace deal through, Alan Dershowitz came out and attacked him, saying, "I wish I never invited you to my birthday." He was acting like a little outraged 12-year-old,
Yeah.
because Obama was talking the truth.
Yeah, it's a standard tactic that when somebody can no longer cover the merits of the argument, they start to go off on these little third grade level tangents that are just pathetic, right?
Yep, that's what they
I
do.
would
Either
just
that,
ask
or
if
they
anybody just
try to demeanor your integrity or your education, or this or that, or
yeah.
that's all they're good at.
Yeah, unfortunately. But I think even if they were good at talking back and forth, nothing would be solved because I did talk to a woman today on a live. She was very rude. She was very loud. She was very arrogant. She was very dismissive. She was just all of the worst qualities of the way somebody could be on a live. Just talked over top of people. Would never be quiet. The host wouldn't mute her. I would have muted her in a heartbeat. But that's just me. But anyway, so people like her, I asked her, I said, I'm just trying to ask you a question. She wouldn't answer it initially. She tried to ask me a question after. I said, all I want to know is, have you ever watched Life in Occupied Palestine, a free documentary by a Jewish American woman?
Well, they don't want
named
to
Anna
answer the
Baltzak?
question.
And she wouldn't answer. She goes,
Yeah, they
she
don't want
thought
to
it's
answer the question. They want to answer with the question.
right. So
They
she
want to
asked
turn
me,
it
have you ever
around.
seen something? I said, well, wait a second. I can talk to you about that in a second. But what about this question? She wouldn't answer it.
That's
Yeah.
typical.
Somebody says, Kitty says it's always deflect, deny, attack. Very well said. Very well said.
Yeah, they were talking about history earlier, saying, "Oh, the Jews were displaced out of Jerusalem in 1839." And I told them it was done by the Jews. It wasn't done by the Palestinians. It was done by the Jews that were fighting against the Ottoman Empire, and they were fighting with the Al Maluk, or one of the other tribes that was there trying to take power.
Yeah.
So but they don't want to hear it. They know what's going on, and they know they're full of it. But they got to keep the lie going because they're enjoying a good life over there on somebody else's land, on
You're not
somebody
kidding.
else's hardship.
That's for sure. Well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate you. Thanks for being here tonight.
No worries. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Take care. Thank you. When somebody in the comments makes a comment like, you're biased or you're showing your bias, I always like to say, I'll say it one more time quickly. If all these variables were flipped 180 degrees and it was an establishment and a partition for an Arab state that ended up displacing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Jewish people, and they became refugees and they had to scatter and they got mistreated, and some of them who didn't want to move got, dealt with 15,000 or so, whatever the number is. And then they, of course, were subjected to what happened over the years, and they pushed back at times, but it never really worked. And we are where we are today, and the Arab state decided after a small attack to go in and do what they're doing. I would be very critical of the Arab state, and I would defend the right of the oppressed Jewish minority that was unarmed and unable to defend itself and left out to dry for decades. I would defend the Jewish resistance because they're the ones being subjected to the oppressive behavior. Now, how can I possibly hate Jewish people if I would take their side given the dynamics? It just so happens in this case that the script is flipped. It happens to be Jewish, mostly Zionists, pushing this, outrageous behavior after what I consider to be an unprovoked attack. I mean, I'm not an unprovoked attack, but something that was a response to longstanding oppression. And it's not just about Gaza. People say, well, we weren't occupying Gaza anymore. They did it. It's not about just Gaza. Yes, there's different political leadership because of a rift between the political process, but that doesn't mean that the people, not the leadership, the people don't identify with each other. And the more militant members of the administrative body of the H group identify with the people, the Palestinian struggle, not just Gaza. So the fact that they're not physically occupied by Israeli soldiers doesn't negate the fact or supersede the fact that their entire identity as a people is affected by the occupation as well as the blockade of Gaza. And those two things taken together are oppressive and an act of war. And therefore they have the right to resist. I'm not saying it has to be pleasant. It wasn't pleasant. It was horrible to some degree. We don't know exactly how or why, but it's understandable inside the context, right? And to say otherwise is being disingenuous. And I would defend it from both sides, depending upon, like I said. So that's why I'm not against Jewish people. Okay, we have Leah Givenchy, I'm not sure how you pronounce it.
Hey Chip, how you doing? Hope all is well.
Hey,
Quick
good.
question. So I've been following a few creators that are talking about protesting the tax route, meaning that they are encouraging folks to, I guess, go to their jobs and file like W-4s and stuff like that to try to impact that. Do you think that would make a difference in mass if, let's say, most pro-Palestinian folks like myself choose to go that route as far as like withholding, at least for this year?
Well, think of it from this point of view. So the United States right now has close to $34 trillion of debt. So one of the ways that countries unfortunately deal with that massive amount of debt is they don't pay it back. They add more currency to the system that dilutes the value of the currency in order to, it's called inflate away the debt. So there's only three ways you can get rid of debt. You can raise taxes on the citizenry. Nobody wants to pay higher taxes. You can cut benefits, meaning you spend less money on services or other stuff. And that's not happening. So then the only other way to do it is to add more currency to the system to deflate away the debt over time. And that's what the US government's doing. So if you and I weren't, let's say we had 10 million people that didn't pay taxes this year, it doesn't impact what the government's going to do because they're just going to do more of the same money printing. So unfortunately, it won't put enough pressure on the powers that be. What will bring pressure on them, which is what matters to them, is they make money. So if you do anything that stops or slows down their ability to run their normal ship, then yeah, that's going to make a difference. So what would stop that? Well, we have three things. We have our labor, we have our numbers, and we have our purchasing power. Those are our three big tools we have. So we already know examples of when somebody withholds their labor in a union. Very similar thing. It has a big impact on an individual company, right? Well, what if everybody, let's say 40 million people, didn't go to work for a month? Well, companies can't operate and things would really get affected. Secondly, what if those same 40 million people got 10 million more people to support them and goes outside and stands in the way like we're seeing right now in the middle of, I don't know where you live, pick a highway or a freeway that's a big part of the day-to-day commerce, just stand there and get in the way. Yeah. So let's say your Atlanta Beltway is now shut down, just shut down. And I-95 North is also on the eastern part of the state of Georgia, gets shut down. So now there's nothing moving in and out of the state of Georgia at all. Well, that's going to get the attention of the governor, right? Maybe the National Guard, et cetera. But if that's done in all 50 states simultaneously, they can't arrest 30 million people. Just can't do it. So that's the only way concessions are going to be made, is by completely locking up the gears of the system. And it's unpleasant to talk about because I don't want it to happen. I don't want it to have to happen. But I think it's the only thing that, if it could happen, would make a big enough difference to wake the people up who are in these power systems to give up a little bit of that power and change the dynamics of the game to meet the demands of the population, because things are grossly unfair right now in the United States.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I was thinking about that, and I didn't think about the inflation part of them simply just printing more money, even if, you know what I mean? So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Drop, but thank you so much.
Yeah, unfortunately. Sure thing. Yeah, thanks for coming in. Appreciate you. Yeah, it'd be nice if any one thing would do it. It's probably the word is and. Like, yes, this and that. So, yes, go vote. Yes, go organize your neighbors. Yes, if you feel the need to take the risk, don't pay your taxes. Yes, get together and form relationships in your community so you can work together, form coalitions from groups that are like-minded, spread the word, and eventually something will come to bear that has some traction, some teeth. But it's got to be big enough, right? It's got to have some scale to it to make a difference. Unfortunately, 500,000 of us going to Washington on Saturday to stand in the National Mall, yeah, it's a nice spectacle, right? It looks good, it shows solidarity, but it doesn't really affect the people in power. They're not going to get scared of us because they see 500,000 people standing in the middle of. They're not. But if those same 500,000 people in every city are blocking everything, standing in front of the places where elected officials go to work in the morning with, the quote unquote pitchforks. I'm not saying to bring pitchforks, but the old thing about people being upset and carrying pitchforks, just, blah, blah, blah. That's what people need to feel, the pitchfork feeling, like the fear. They need to feel some fear that they can't overcome what's being put at them. That's what'll change things, nothing more. Okay, we got more people waiting. So we have Mighty Servant, then Lisa, then we only have 13 minutes left. Before I bring on Mighty Servant, let me just say this because I gotta cover this stuff. So for those of you who don't know, we have 350 people here. So if you don't know who the hell I am, like, who's this guy? My name is Chip Barnes. I'm an Army veteran. I served in the first Gulf War. I was in a tank unit. And our job was to get the Iraqi military out of the small Gulf state of Kuwait, which we did. Luckily, nobody in my unit perished, but I've seen combat. Combat's horrible. So I know a little bit about what people are going through in Gaza, but not nearly as much, obviously. But I learned about the Israel-Palestine issue when I was in my senior year of college, just before I went into the Army, so when I was 21. And I'm 56, so I've been keeping a close eye on this thing for many, many years, because it intrigued me that everything I'd been told about Israel was completely different than what I heard in this person's presentation. One of my classmates gave a senior talk on the first Intifada, which was in 1987. So it kind of shook me up, right? I mean, it's like, I never heard any of this. I didn't know what a Gaza Strip was. I didn't know what a West Bank was. So anyway, it's funny. I was born in 1967, the same year that the Six-Day War took place, where all these major changes happened. So maybe this was all meant to be, right? Maybe that's just stars lining up. Anyway, so I'm sort of an independent geopolitical person. I'm no expert, but I know enough that it's fun to talk about stuff, and I enjoy talking to people who disagree with me and stuff like that. I've been on social media for right around 3 months. I came on just before October 7th, just pure chance. But I've enjoyed it, but I'm new, so I'm still kind of figuring everything out. So I have a link tree, and I've been building my different social sites out like most people do. If you want to see some of those, the way to get there quickly is to go through a link in my bio. It says Linktree and then my name, Chip Barnes. And if you click on that link, it'll launch you to a little list that shows you where my other stuff is. And if you do nothing else, go to my Twitter, which is just my name, Chip Barnes, and check out my very first message that's on the top of my feed. It has all the names of people that I've followed for years and years that I think are great, and from whom I've learned most of what I'm sharing with you all. I very rarely figure something out. It's just stuff that I hear from other people. I put it together. So yeah, thank you, Em, for putting that up there. That's it right there. It's just Linktree Chip Barnes. While you're there, if you go down the list, you'll see some different things which are interesting. Some of the stuff are different groups we've created. So if you want to get involved in either tracking what's going on in Gaza or the West Bank, or you want to get involved in some of these other issues, these organizational issues we're talking about, if you think that makes sense and you want to kind of get started, that's a starting point, right? It's not going to be any one person. It's not going to happen by accident. It's going to be each and every one of us doing something along the way to push this big rock back up the hill we got to get figured out, right? So there's no right time to get involved, right? Do it when you do it. And then finally, at the bottom of that, if you want to help out, I have a Patreon and I have other ways you can contribute. I'm independent. I don't have any funding yet. I've not worked on anything. And I got to figure that out because I'm trying to do trading, which is very challenging and it's risky. So you can lose money as fast as you can make it, right? So anyway, so there's that. So I want to tell you my schedule real quick and then we'll go to the next guest. My schedule on here on TikTok is Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 p.m. Eastern time to 10 p.m. Eastern time, like tonight. And then every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, I go live at noon Eastern time until 2 p.m. So that'll be my schedule for tomorrow if you want to check it out. Each and every one of these sessions are recorded, downloaded, and then put up on my YouTube and my Rumble channel. Now, I apologize. I don't know how to reorder stuff yet. So you might see today's date like 5 or 6 videos back because I have to figure out how. I mean, that's how new I am. I don't know how to do any of this stuff. So remember, I'm 56. So, okay, getting back to our guest. Thank you for listening to that. And if you want to help out, that'd be great. So let's go with Mighty Servant, Mods, and Aromia. We only have about 10 minutes left, so we got to be quick. Okay. Let's go to Mods and then Aromia. Patreon's up now, Tom. There's a $5 option right now. Hello?
Hi, Chip. How are you? I'm just gonna
Hi,
ask my
good.
question
Okay.
and drop. So, knowing your history and how you served in the army, I wanted to ask you how I refuse to believe that the IDF is a monolith and that the ones that coming on Hamza's lives and say that they're happy to unalive the Palestinian children. I refuse to believe that
Yeah,
they're all like that. So I wanted to ask you,
yeah,
what
yes.
makes a army lose its morals? What leads to that?
Okay, great question. So again, let's forget about Israel-Palestine right now. Let's just go somewhere else. So if you go back to Vietnam, the United States, the what's called the rules of engagement. That's what the army does as far as its doctrine that says this has to happen before you can do this. You can't go in with a tank and like blow stuff up unless someone does this first, for example. So what happened in Vietnam? The U.S. soldiers were out trying to fight this enemy called the Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese fighters. And they were working in very difficult jungle terrain. And the Vietnamese had dug tunnels, just like we're seeing here in Gaza. And it's very, very, very hard to see and catch an enemy who can pop up, fire and go back down. You don't even see where it came from. And all of a sudden one of your friends is down, right? So that happens to you 10, 20, 30 days in a row, and it makes you angry, right? So if you come into a village with a bunch of civilians who look just like the same people who you've been fighting or trying to fight out in the field, well, you take out your anger on them. It's not that you should, doesn't make any sense, but people do crazy things in combat. Your brain turns in ways you wouldn't even believe. And so that's an example of doing something immoral, even though if your army doesn't have official directives to do so. And not everybody did it, but it happened enough at the time. There were a lot of atrocities in Vietnam done by U.S. soldiers, really embarrassing stuff. Many soldiers still alive today remember doing it and have a lot of shame around it, right? So the Israeli army is no different, except in this case, its doctrine has shifted over the years. And the new right-wing government and their ministers have a different doctrine. The rules of engagement aren't this has to happen first before we do this. The rules are we're going to do what we want, when we want, how we want, be damned whatever happens. It's called the Hannibal Directive. And we were wondering what happened on 10/7 in terms of why things went down the way they did. Why did so many civilians get harmed? Well, it turns out the blame that was placed on the H group initially turned out to be not accurate. Now, we don't know the exact details, but we know that based on the way the military responded, including the use of tanks, Apache helicopters, and artillery, that much of the damage that took place in a lot of these little kibbutzim, these little areas that were like settlements, was not done by the H group. They didn't have the equipment to do it. They couldn't have done it. Some of the structural damage to homes, and there's a couple of Israeli leaders that have actually openly said now that they gave instructions to their tank commanders to fire on houses where there's suspected to be H group members holding individual Israeli families hostage. We will never know unless somebody gets the information out what the numbers really were. My best guess, it was probably 1/3 of the people that were engaged were military in terms of uniformed. The other third that were engaged were probably of military age and probably were reservists from the IDF or IOF, and therefore they were legitimate combatants in my opinion. But some of them were unalived by the H group. Most of them were probably unalived by the response by the Israeli military that just went hog wild. And then the other third might have been done by the H group directly, people in cars, people at the festival. So my guess is, if I had to guess, I'm not going to be right about this, my guess is that about 340 people is my guess is what the H group did directly. Now, some of the other people that were unalived by the H group that were of military age, you might want to lump them in, maybe make it 500. But no way was it 1,150 that the H group unalived. No, not at all. Because many of them were soldiers. You can't count them as civilians, right? That doesn't make any sense. So anyway, that's kind of that. So people in combat, and by the way, I agree that not everybody from Israel who fights in the IDF, there are people that have left the IDF, and if they've come out and talked about it, the fact that they can't believe they did what they did, and they publicly proclaim, they condemn what they did while they were there. It's called Breaking the Silence. So if you want to go to YouTube and type in Breaking the Silence, it's a whole group that accepts soldiers into it that are like, hey, we don't agree with this. This was bad. We're not going to keep silent about this. Breaking the silence, right? So that's how it happens. Unfortunately, it's part of war. It happened a lot in the Iraq War with U.S. soldiers too. It happens in most wars, unfortunately.
All right, thank you so much. And also, I do apologize. I got really nervous and I came up and asked how you were and didn't wait for an answer.
That's okay.
So,
But thank you. Thanks for asking. Yeah, I appreciate it.
yeah, thank you. And I hope to see you on this live one more time because I think I do have a few more questions. Have a great night.
Yeah, please come back. I'd love to have that happen. Yeah, it'd be great to have you back. Good question. Yeah, it's unfortunate, right, that people do crazy things when they're in crazy circumstances. You know, we all like to think of ourselves as good people, right? Like we wouldn't do that. Trust me, if you find yourself in a situation where you're stressed out, you haven't slept for 5 or 6 days, someone's trying to hurt you, your brother, your sister, your friend are all dying around you, you'd be surprised what you do sometimes. How do you stop yourself, Chip? I'm not sure what that means. Stop myself from what? Eating a lot of junk food? I don't do a great job of it. Okay. Well, one last guest here. If they come up. All right, they're timing out. I'll tell you what, if you want to come back in, exit TikTok and then come back into TikTok and look up the live. And if you come in before we finish, I'll take you on here. So yeah, I mean, listen, these are crazy times right now. We're in a very precarious spot. For those of you who don't know, this thing, if this thing sparks a regional conflict, it could spark everything. This could be the end of everything, which I know sounds dramatic, but it doesn't take much to connect those dots. I mean, as soon as the superpowers with nuclear weapons get deeply involved in an international conflict, all bets are off. So we could be talking in a much different set of circumstances in 1 month from now, right? A lot could change. You could have nations that intervene. Oh, somebody says, how do you stop or control yourself from behaving like some of these soldiers? I mean, some people just aren't wired to harm anybody. Let's face it. There are people that go into the military that aren't gung-ho to be in the military. They're very reluctant to even do the things that are required in the military, right? So there are soldiers that watch that happen, and unfortunately, you can't speak against it. Those group dynamics are so strong. You just couldn't say anything. Trust me, you can't talk in those circumstances directly. You can go back and report it later, but they would off you if you started saying something. But there's some that didn't participate, right? And so you just have to have, an iron constitution about not doing certain things. I don't know. How do you maintain your faithfulness to your wife or your husband? Which isn't easy in all situations, right? You do it because you're resolute, right? Because you just don't want to cross certain boundaries. Or maybe you do. I don't know. So, yeah, I will say this. It's very discouraging to hear a lot of the people like the Hebrew Hammer who are very arrogant, very condescending. They don't know a lot of things that they don't know. They think they know it all, but they don't. And this is what I really believe. I don't think most people are bad people. I think people do bad things because of their lack of knowledge or their programming to know certain things, and they act upon it. And that makes sense. The challenge is, how do you reach somebody to take a look at the information that's out there to get them to, understand the broader context and then hopefully see it differently, right? That's hard. And believe me, the people that have broken out of the Israeli mindset, the people that have rejected Zionism, who were brought up either in American or other households that were Zionist, or in Israel especially, the programming and the indoctrination that goes on with Zionism is second to none. I mean, it is totally absorbing, 100% encompassing your whole life. And you're told from the day you're born that Israel's the chosen people, the Jews are the chosen people, that God gave them this land, this is for them, and that everyone else is a T-word and an enemy and just wants to unalive everybody. It's the whole 9 yards. So that's the filter through which they see the world. And so everything that makes sense to them fits that narrative. And if it doesn't fit that narrative, it doesn't make sense, it gets rejected. That's how reinforced it is. But somehow, some way, some people break from it and they look back at it with horror, like, oh my God, I can't believe I used to believe that shit, right? I'll give you an example. People have heard this before, but if you haven't heard it, it'll be helpful. So if you have grandparents and you've ever been to the grandparents' house, sometimes they have an older house. You walk in and you notice it's like a musty, sort of unusual smell that you don't smell in other places. And not every old person has this, but a lot of old people's houses just have this strange kind of odor. And you notice it because you just came in off the porch, but your grandparents who live there all the time, it's become invisible to them because they're always in it, right? They're always there, just it's not noticeable. And you might even ask your grandfather, hey, Grandpa, do you know, what's that smell? What's causing that? And he would say, what smell? What are you talking about? Right? So being inside that older person's house and being immersed in the conversation, the narrative 24/7, 365, year after year after year, decade, that's the house that you're in, right? And you just can't notice it because it's just all you know. It just seems normal, right? And if anybody even tells you there's a front porch, you look at them like you're crazy. What do you mean a front porch? Are you out of your mind? That's crazy talk, man. Come on back in the kitchen. Let's make dinner. But somehow, some way, you get forced on the porch sometimes. Somebody drags you out, whatever, you fall out there because something crazy happens, or maybe you have a best friend or a girlfriend or a lover who sees it differently, and you listen for once in your life, and you're like, damn, I didn't know that, right? That's being dragged out on the front porch. Then when you go back in or look back in at the house, you're like, damn, of course that's noticeable. It's ridiculous. It's so silly. Of course I noticed that now, right? But you didn't see it before because you were always stuck in it. So that's propaganda for you, and it's very effective. And my argument is that most Westerners, including myself when I was younger, are living in that old person's house and don't even know there's a front porch. So, for what it's worth, hope that's a good analogy for you. I think that kind of helps. So anyway, let's see if there's anybody else in the guest queue. Nope. Okay, so to repeat my schedule one more time for those of you who don't know it, it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 8 p.m. Eastern time until 10 p.m., just like tonight. And then Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday from 12 noon Eastern time until 2 p.m. And the reason I used to do nights only, but the reason I switched it was because a lot of people who are in the Middle East or in Asia were having to start watching at like 4 in the morning. So they like begging me, please do one. So that's why I switched it for half the ones there. So plus it gives people some chance to get in. Somebody says, can you contact me? If you go to my link tree, at the very bottom, it says email me or email Chip or something like that. So I have a different email that I use just for this, but I ask you to please be polite. And, I had somebody who's pro-Israel just start spamming me like crazy with all this negative, just horrible stuff. And that's no sense. But if you want to, you can. It's down there. So my link tree is in my bio. It just says Linktree Chip Barnes, where all my videos are. And click on that. A list of stuff will come up, which is all my social media. All of the groups I've formed for all the different advocacy work we're talking about. By the way, I didn't mention this, I'm sorry. The one at the very bottom is the email. But there's a new group that's formed if you're interested in learning more about, or you're actually thinking of attending the January 13th protest, which, if you don't know, is a March for Gaza on January 13th in Washington, D.C. at 1 p.m. at the National Mall. So if you're not aware of that, there's a group that I created on Telegram. It's linked in that link tree. It says January 13th protest. It says join Telegram group January 13th protest. So if you click on that, it'll take you to there. You can join it. It's free to join. And it just has people talking about like meetups or talking about what's going to go on. If you're going to go to that though, just know this, that the government uses, and this is common knowledge, but put it this way, the government can use or could use, and most people think they do use, a device called a Stingray. And what a Stingray is, if you don't know what a Stingray is, it's very simple. It's used a lot with drug cases, but it acts as a cell phone tower. So if you're walking with your phone near a protest, and your phone information gets intercepted, it acts as an intermediary. It mimics a cell tower, and it grabs all your information off your phone, including your personal identifier, anything you do with the phone while you're using it, email, whatever. It just captures all your data. And it seems like it's just working normally, but it's going through an intermediate step that captures stuff. The reason why people think that they're worried about people building a list of all the participants in the rally, some of this. So you can also put your phone in what's called a Faraday cage or Faraday box. It's a box that completely snuffs out the signal. So if you want to do that, you can bring your phone. I'm not going to bring mine. I'm not even going to have my phone with me that day. Just, you don't need it. If you're going to go to a metro stop, you're going to walk to the protest, walk back to the metro stop, get the hell out. But the other thing is, and I have no idea if this is true or not, but somebody on a live 2 nights ago was crying her eyes out, saying, please don't go to the protest. Something really bad's going to happen. I don't know what the hell she's talking about. I asked her like a trillion times, like, what do you mean? Can you be specific? Where did you hear this? Like all those questions. She just said, I got it from a very reliable source, but I can't tell you, or something like that. So I don't know. But so I don't think anything crazy is going to happen. Listen, it's possible in any mass event that, just like people allege on January 6th, I don't know if it happened or not, but people have made these allegations that people come into crowds that act like they're part of the crowd, but they're really not. They're somebody else with a different agenda, and they might cause trouble. Or it could be like what happened in the Boston Marathon could happen, or who knows, right? And therefore they might blame it on a certain group because they're the bad people. Like, oh, look at these people. They can't even protest peacefully or whatever, Who knows? I'm just putting it out there. It's a march for Gaza on January 13th, which is next Saturday, this Saturday coming up in Washington, D.C. at 1 p.m. So I don't know. I'm just putting it out there because somebody said that. So like I said, if you want to check me out on my different social media, it's through the link tree in my bio. I've not heard from Quinn. People keep asking me about Quinn, like what's going on. I don't talk to Quinn much in terms of, I get an update like once every 10 days from him. So one of the content creators was thinking about bringing up Sean King. If you know who Sean King is, can you type the number 1 in the chat? If you do know who Sean King is. I'm just curious to see if anybody. I mean, a lot of people know who Sean is because a lot of people, he was on Instagram and a lot of people probably followed him on Instagram. He's back on TikTok now. Now, in terms of things you hear, and I'm going to leave it at this, okay? In terms of things you hear, I heard this about Fiona Ryan and I heard this about Sean, but I don't have confirmation. But I will say this. I generally have a pretty good perception of things, and I've almost never been wrong when I've had these feelings that I have. It's possible, but it's rare. There's a lot of allegations, a lot, not just a couple, a lot of allegations that Sean, when he's raised money, been a lot of improprieties. So my only suggestion would be, if you see any requests that surround money, don't go there, just out of pure safety, because there's enough things floating in the ether that probably don't make it a sensible move. Because one of the things Quinn wanted to do was go down in Cairo and find out where the real organizations are, where the money can go into the people who need it the most without any shenanigans, like nobody taking a big cut. And I don't know for sure, but my sense is that something in the past has happened that gave people the indication that that was not happening as well as it needed to for that to happen. So just be careful about the money thing. If somebody is advocating for the right cause, great, I'm all for it. We need all the help we can get. And I've heard people say there's evidence. I've seen a letter sent to me that he never had a GoFundMe page. Okay? That doesn't mean anything, because GoFundMe is just one means of sending information. So listen, I don't know what's in the man's heart. I'm not making the allegation. I'm sharing with you all that others have made allegations. And the way that I read it and the way that I listened to it, and it was like 15 different sources, I thought it was plausible enough that it was worthy of sharing, or I wouldn't have shared it. You can make up your own mind, do your own research. Okay? So there you go. All right, everybody, listen, I appreciate you being here tonight. I know you have a lot of choices. This is a Monday night. You stayed up late with me. Thank you so much. And I will be on tomorrow at noon. As always, I appreciate you and those who did the moderating. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Good to see everybody. All the people that are regulars, thank you so much. And for the new people, please check out my videos. I got a lot of cool stuff. I'm about to drop one in 5 minutes. I hope it drops. It's pretty funny. I'll see you soon, okay? Good night.